I was a college kid. I didn't have any money. I mean, I had debt from college, but other than that, not a whole lot. And once I decided that that's what I wanted to do, I figured that I would just keep working at it and keep working different angles until I could figure out a way to make a living at it. Back in the day, my goals were a lot more modest. I mean, I always thought, well, if I can make like $35,000 a year, I can do this for a living. And obviously that's not going to work anymore. But back then when I was in my early 20s and kind of delusional, that's what I thought. And honestly, I mean, it took so much work to get to this point. I mean, so much money invested on my account. I mean, when I was in college, I was in school full time. I had two part-time jobs, and I was taking care of my collection, which was growing by the day or week. And I mean, I really worked hard at it. I think that's the biggest thing that I can take away from it, is that I had to work so hard and so long to get where I was. And I had so many failures along the ways and so many learning lessons. And it was a lot of work to get to the point where I could do it full time. But I think it was, so 4 years after I graduated college in December '96. By 2000, I was doing it full time, and I've never looked back. It's been great.
Man, that's awesome. Now, back then, we were married then as well.
No, I got married in 2003. So, yeah, my wife didn't have to go through all the lean years when I was, barely making enough to get by, and really scraping the bottom of the barrel every month just to get through. And so she kind of came along actually like a year after I went full time. So, I was already becoming successful, and I figured out kind of what I needed to do to be able to do this full time.
Okay, awesome. Now, let's talk about that big investment project, right? Like, especially in the beginning days, like what was the first project that really make you take off? Like, what was that big push off project you would say?
Really, like back in the '90s, I think the biggest thing was, because I love so many different species, I was always trying to work with like really rare animals, trying to breed like rare species of leaf-tailed geckos, rare species of Phelsuma, all these really rare things. And then I wasn't having enough success with them to really be able to commercially breed them. And so when I really decided to focus on leopard geckos, crested geckos, veiled chameleons, and bearded dragons, and focus on producing large numbers, because those animals sell really well. There's always a good demand for them. There's a lot of color morphs of most of those. When I started working with those and really started trying to produce numbers of those, that's when I got to be successful enough that I could do it full time. And then I started investing the profits from that into ball pythons and boas and other species of snakes, mostly ball pythons. And the first ball python project I really spent a lot of money on back in the day was albinos. And back then there weren't a whole lot of different morphs to choose from, but I had an albino male, and I bred it from my possible het females, and then eventually produced albinos. The first project that we ever spent like a significant amount of money on was our clown project. I've had clown in my collection since early 2003. And I've got a lot of clowns, and my collection is fairly clown heavy. It's not only clowns, but I have a lot of clowns. And that's because I've had the project since 2003. And I think we bought a male clown and two het females for 23,000 cash back then. And that was, really looking back on it in the big scheme of things, that was probably the best investment that I ever made. It was great. And, and unfortunately, the male that I got, he was around 250 grams when I got him in January of 2003. He didn't eat for me until I think July of 2003. So I lost a year of production on him, because if he would have been able to breed, I would have been able to produce hets earlier. And so I lost some production, a year production on him. But still, my clown collection is great right now, and it's all from that original male.
Yeah, that's so awesome to hear that. The foundation that you stand so proud on came from that one male. You know what I mean? Which is just like that's one. I mean, that's one ingredient to many other things that's a part of your foundation. But it's still awesome. Do you still have that male? Is he still around or no?
No, I don't have them anymore. I mean, I don't have much use for a normal clown male anymore, but you
Some
know,
people keep them.
his what's that?
People like to keep,
Oh,
you know, like they like regardless, you know, like some people get so attached and they, you know, like for instance, I have my very first ball python that I got in 2016 and I always keep it, you know, but that's why I asked. I didn't know if you were one of the ones who would want
well, the biggest morph that got me into wanting to really work with ball pythons was the Bumblebee. When I
that.
was at the first NARBC in Tinley Park, um, Kevin McCurley from Nerd had his table right across the aisle from mine, and my table was full of leopard geckos, and he had, of course, ball pythons and other species of pythons, and he had two bumblebees there, and they were $60,000 a piece. And I remember looking at those things, not thinking about the money, other than the fact that I could never afford them. I looked at those bumblebees and I was so fascinated. There were actually ball pythons that looked like that. It was so different from anything else that I had seen. And I told myself one day I'm going to be able to produce those. So in 2003, we bought a male spider. I think we paid $17,500 for him. And we bought a yearling female pastel for $6,000. And in 2005, yeah, I know it's crazy to think of the prices of that stuff back then versus now. But you know, that was you know, almost 20 years ago, so
Yeah.
it's a long time.
I love hearing it. I love hearing that. You know, I like, you know, even when
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure you were obviously familiar when normals were going like for over $1,000 at one point, right?
like a buck a gram. Yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
luckily I had a large collection of normals. I had probably 50 or 60 adult normal females back then. My whole ball python collection started with 10 normal breeder females that I trade. I produced 100 leopard geckos and traded them for 10 normal females. And those were the start of my entire ball python collection, those 10 normal females. And then a couple of years later, I bought a group of 30 like farm raised normal females, and I held all those back and raised them up. And that was the base that started like most of my codon projects. It was crazy. So yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it all started from normals and hets and, you know, all that. But so anyway, when I going back, I bought my bumblebee in my past, or my spider in my pastel in 2003. I produced my first bumblebee in 2005, and luckily I produced two of them in the same clutch. And because my goal for ball pythons, I thought the perfect ball python was a bumblebee at the time. You know, this is back in the early 2000s. So I
Yeah.
produced those two bumblebees, and they're both females. And I sold one for $15,000, and that almost paid for the original spider male that we bought. And then I kept the other one, and I still have that bumblebee female right now. So she's from 2005, and she's actually gravid right now. So I still have her, and she's one of my favorite snakes. I'll probably never sell her. I mean, I don't think I would ever sell her. You know, if my I would, you know, keep her over almost all my other snakes, not because she's particularly valuable, but she's my first one.
And that's why I fucking love snakes, Garrick. I mean, they live for, I mean, if you do it
They
right,
live a long time.
they'll live with you, you know? And I'm a big dog person too, but the things about dogs, they're not here for too long, you know? And I love
Yeah.
dogs. But you know, snakes, you know, like you don't have that worry so much, you know. And the awesome thing is when they reproduce for you, even if they don't produce for you, it's still awesome. But you know, seeing them create life and make, you know, better versions of themselves for the most part, it's pretty awesome. It's rewarding. I would say right now, like out of all, I've done a lot of cool stuff, you know, coming up in my life, and nothing's been as rewarding as breeding snakes. I'll tell you that right now. This has been the best part of my life for sure. Hands down.
I mean, for me, breeding anything is awesome. I love seeing baby geckos hatch. I love seeing ball pythons hatch. I mean, I've said it many, many times, but you know, during the hatching season, every day is like Christmas at the shop. You know, I go in and, well, what's going to hatch today? And, you know, what kind of new things am I going to produce today? And it's awesome. I just love it.
Right. Now, you talked about investing in some farm normals back then, right?
Yep.
Imports is what you mean by farm. Am I correct? They were raised.
Yeah, they're hatched in Africa and shipped over, and yep.
So let's talk about that game. I don't really know too much, and I'm about the import game. You know, I mean, every now and then you see people say that stuff's still imported from Africa, right? Is that true, or is stuff still coming from Africa?
I don't have I'm a captive bred kind of guy. I don't deal with import stuff much. I got those. I mean, back then, I don't really even know if it happens that much anymore, but back then, during the hatching season in Africa, they would capture normal female or all the wild females and let them hatch let them lay their eggs, and then they would take the eggs and hatch the babies out, and then they'd start shipping them to other countries that wanted baby captive bred captive bred ball pythons. So yeah, a lot of times, people. I mean, some of the big wholesalers and importers over here would get thousands of them. And at the time, people would pick through them. And once we started figuring out that there were more morphs out there other than just the ones that you cannot miss, like pieds and albinos and things like that, there are more the subtle morphs. People started really picking through all these big, huge batches of normal babies that came in. And I wasn't a part of any of that. I mean, I don't, I'm in Wisconsin, so I don't have any